let's move to my favorite part of this conference, the panel discussion. I'd like to ask all the speakers to join now here. And if you have any comment or question from each other, you can begin with that. And then we'll open the stage for the audience if they have any question or any comment. We can begin with Mr. Richard Bennett.
Okay, well, I'm happy to maybe to comment or question. First, a couple of points. One is that I agree with Tom Searing that I didn't go into it in depth, but the human rights violations continue broadly, including reprisals, both killings, disappearances, and arbitrary detention, a point you made. But I want to maybe be a little bit controversial and turn to Mr. Aziz Rafiei. As I understood it, it was in Dari, but thanks to Mr. Ayub, I got a little bit of summary in English. What I understood is that you are calling on, it is clear that human rights violations, crimes are being committed in Afghanistan, and you call on the world community to do more. And I think that's fair, but is it working? I think you're right. But my sense is that different member states are aware of what is going on. It's not that they're ignorant of it, but they have decided to prioritize their own short-term self-interest. And the examples would be those countries that are now beginning to deport Afghans because they are pressured by their right-wing electorates who are anti-immigration. And I think this is something we're likely to see more of, perhaps except in a few countries, one of which you live in, and I would put Australia in that group as well, where there is a very strong Afghan diaspora, which is able to leverage a bit of a bit more sympathy and support from your government. But I think in many countries there is a tension between what are often talked by as pragmatists who say the Taliban are increasingly powerful. They have control of the country, and we might as well do business with them. And those who are more principled in their approach. I fear that the direction is going, that the trend is going in the direction of the pragmatists. So I'm being a little bit, I would say, rather concerned, not very, rather pessimistic. So I put that out there for discussion. How can we get the pragmatists to become principled and not keep becoming pragmatists and looking after their self-interests? I don't believe they don't know what's going on. I think they know what's going on and they're not acting on it in a principled fashion. Sorry. Thank you.
Should I respond, Khanim Rafiq? Should I respond to this comment, or is what a question? Actually,
yes,
was a comment.
Of course you can. You guys can just take mic. I don't want to interfere at all.
Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate it. That was very. I think there was a bit of not a misunderstanding, but I will send my presentation in a minute to all the group. My concern is that today is a responsibility of every state around the world that they should care about the human rights situation in Afghanistan, because any ignorance in this area will have a very strong question in the future for all of us. So, for example, supporting I mentioned actually the issue of the support for the HRDs outside the country, or for the activists outside the country who are now currently being under the threat of deport back to Afghanistan. My concern is, if the international community and the governments do not recognize this as a priority, this will be a huge shame for the future for all of us, including these governments, particularly for those who claim that they believe in the universal values and principles that they have approved it as conventions at the UN level. For example, you just mentioned about the issue of the shortage in budget for your office. This is exactly what I mentioned. This is the responsibility of the international community to provide enough support to all the mechanisms which are in effect for working on human rights in Afghanistan. I think that is an area that we all agree and is very, very essential for our future continuation of our work in this area. So there is no argument about what you said, just a bit of clarification. And yes, this is very selective approach at this moment, not only by certain governments, but majority of the governments, majority of the politics around the world, particularly in the issue, not only actually about Afghanistan, it's about Gaza, it's about Myanmar, it's about Ukraine, it's about Russia, it's about China, it's about Venezuela. I think these are the situations that we are at the, not at the only at the regional level in Afghanistan, but also at the global level we're facing. It's a very selective approach. It's a very potentially politically motivated, as we say, the PCP, the politically correct PCP, politically correct policy that they are taking. I think that is something that we all concerned about, and I totally agree with you. Yes.
I would probably just very briefly comment or add something to what Richard said. I think, yes, you have pragmatists and you have to get them to act more principled, but I think, at least in part, what is in the way of having pragmatists act principally or principled in several countries, including in some European countries, is populism these days. Just one of, unfortunately, many examples. When you look at, well, we mentioned briefly some of the returns to Afghanistan also taking place, for example, in Germany, they have been highlighted by the conservative part of the current government as if they were important to reduce immigration in general. But in fact, at least as of now, or you could say luckily, there have been negligibly few cases where Afghans have been returned, as opposed to, say, of course, from Pakistan or from Iran, etc., because there are also not that many in comparison. But they have been highlighted as if it's very important, and it's very important to the conservative part of the government because they want to not lose their constituency to the actual right-wing populists. And I think that trend we see in unfortunately, in several also European states. So they may be pragmatists, but they don't turn into a principled approach. They rather turn into the populist ways. The populism gets in the way of maybe a more principled approach, at least currently, in the current political current, if you like.
Thank you. Mr. Zaman.
I think I mentioned earlier the concept of the cherry picking in what constitutes a human rights crime around the world. But we also, I think, need something else in addition to that, and that is that we have to define if we define a human rights violation as a crime, then in the context of legal parlance, crime should not be defined by who commits it, rather by who is the victim of the crime. And in many cases, this is also overlooked, in addition to the point that I mentioned earlier. For example, in the last 50 years, Afghanistan has been invaded by two superpowers. But is it really presented in that light? Not so. The Russian invasion was considered an invasion. But the American invasion, yes, they camouflaged it as NATO operation or whatever. But the matter of the fact is that this was an invasion. An invasion is basically anytime the uniformed troops of one country are outside of their own country for certain operations. But the critical issue that we should be concerned with is that when I think there was Mr. or Miss Ahmad asked the question in the chat box as to what crimes are committed by whom, and in my opinion, there is a blanket, deliberate side issuing of the committal of the crimes done by the United States. Does anyone remember what happened in Abu Ghraib in Iraq when American troops were pretty much playing with the lives of the Iraqi prisoners? Well, we know that because of certain conscientious objectors of a different form that brought it to the world community through footages of very, very unspeakable crimes. But do we forget that actually the crimes that were committed in Iraq and Abu Ghraib were stage 2 of the crimes that were committed in Afghanistan? There was Abu Ghraib that everyone knows about, but not too many people know about Bagram. The worst crimes were committed in Bagram, but it didn't get the same exposure. And therefore, it's totally irrelevant. We don't even talk about it. Yes, they released 5,000 prisoners. These are not the 5,000 prisoners. Those were the 5,000 who survived. So regardless of which side of the political equation we are, the point is that people should not have been imprisoned and tortured in their own country by an invading power. In addition to, let's not even get to Guantanamo and all that, where every rule and regulation of the Geneva Conventions that demanded that we treat prisoners of war with dignity, they were violated by the United States. So we do have this standard, and the point is that we are defining crime in at least in the Afghan theater, if I may use that term. I hate to use military terminology, but here it becomes necessary. That in Afghanistan, it is determined by who commits the crime. So since October 7, in case we forget, there was another October 7. That was the October 7 of 2021. Another invasion from the west to the east. And since October 7th, most of the killing, I would say over 95% of the killing, had been done by the forces that be, and the victims were predominantly Pashtuns. Whether it was, they simply defined it the south of the country, or it was Helmand, or it was Kunduz, wherever you go. There were a few exceptions, I understand that. But this in itself is a crime that is right there, committed before our eyes, just because it was packaged in a different way to the media. And of course, they were controlling the media too. Therefore, nobody even mentions that it was a crime, let alone that it was committed. And as Mr. Kane was referring to, some of these superpowers, like the United States, like China, they are not superpowers militarily. They are superpowers because they are above the law. when it comes to international law. That's why they can do whatever they want to, whether it's in Uyghurs, whether it's in Afghanistan and Iraq or Libya, but they can get away with it because they just make it an optional for themselves that, yes, we are members of this world community, including the United Nations, but we don't want to be members of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because there is that word criminal in there that is staring them in the eyes, and they do not have the guts to look at it straight and say, yes, we committed it. And when we are talking about the right movements in the West, where did it all start? And right now, I think the president of the United States was asked a few days ago, or at least I saw a video where he was defining that the Muslims hate the West. And the reporter either didn't have the guts, the knowledge, or the audacity to say, wait a minute, what if the Muslims had invaded 7 countries in the West, how would we feel? The United States trampled on the independence, on the sovereignty, on the territorial integrity of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and keep going. And they say, oh, yeah, Muslims hate us. I don't know whether we have a kind of a sanitized way of saying it in the Pashto language. I don't know whether I'm stupid or I'm stupid. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And then Mr.
Might
Conning.
add something. Let me also read the question I have received from Ahmed. It was related to what already have been discussed, and I would like to also add my views around the discussion. It's about, so I refer that crimes committed by US forces has been deprioritized by the ICC prosecutor, and the question is, I received is the reason behind that, and also it emphasized on other ISAF members' crimes committed in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan has been under the preliminary examination of the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC since 2006. It took the Office of Prosecutor 1 decade. In 2017, finally, they concluded that war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly happened in Afghanistan by all parties involved in the conflict, that including the United States Army and its CIA. But it does not mention other member of the ISAF or NATO, possibly because it does not have access to information. If you look into the preliminary examination stage, examination of information, you will see that the Office of the Prosecutor is only looking into the open sources. They are not doing a proper investigation. So based on the open sources, they concluded that at least USA Army and CIA had committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, and particularly torturing of the prisoners, as Mr. Stranzek referred to that, and also sexual abuses of the prisoners, and at some cases also rape. And the main source for that conclusion of the Office of the Prosecutor was a detailed report from the U.S. Senate Committee on, I think, Security or something like that, which I do not have remembered the details of that. So in the mandate of the current mandate of the OTP, they have this mandate to look into those crimes. But it's also not limited to the U.S. They can also include, they can also look into the crimes by the other ISAF members if they have committed in Afghanistan. And now they have a full investigation mandate, which has been given by the Pretrial Chamber 2 of the ICC in March 2020. However, why they are not looking into that? Is it affected by the politics? It could be. I cannot ignore that part, because ICC as an institution has been under attack, especially by the US. When the former prosecutor Fatou Bensouda put US in her application into 2017, that time President Trump's administration put her and one of her colleagues in the sanction list. That was the first time a state putting agenda of justice into a sanction list. So that was a huge attack. However, I cannot say that attack influenced the decision of that time prosecutor. She stood firm and pursued her request regardless of the sanction. And then when Biden came back, Biden removed the sanction, and the current prosecutor Karim Khan, when he requested exemption of the investigation, before the judges making a decision, he said, if the authorization has been granted to restart the investigation, he would put the emphasis or the focus on crimes committed by the Taliban in ISK and would deprioritize the other aspects. He did not mention what include the other aspect, but of course it's very clear that the other aspects include the crimes against alleged crimes by US and also alleged crimes by the former government's national forces. That time, it was said that Karim Khan might be influenced by the politics around that, but it is so difficult to confirm that, especially when now we see that Karim Khan himself is on the U.S. sanction list because of his request to issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Israeli leaders due to the crimes happening in Gaza. And I can also confirm that when it comes particularly to ICC is not an institution liked by the superpower, either military or they are acting above the law, however, but including USA and China and Russia. So Russia, at least Russia and US, they have a sanction list, and there are a few of the ICC officials in their list in both countries. And at these days, President Trump is trying to put a sanction on ICC as an institute, which would be a further step towards eliminating ICC as an institution. With that sanction, almost experts working around ICC or in ICC, they are saying that would be the end of the ICC, unfortunately. So to wrap up, when it comes to ICC and its policy, as a person who is following, I can really say at this stage that ICC has not been influenced by the politics so far when it comes to Afghanistan. They have pursued their mandate, and what they brought, the logic they brought to prioritize two aspects of the investigation, for me, it makes sense. But of course, it's disappointing. It is mainly coming from their limitation and financial capacity rather than other issues. But at the same time, I would say that it's so concerning that ICC has been under attack, and politics, unfortunately, as reality, the superior reality of international justice could create more challenges, and that in a real world could limit the capacity and the influence of institution like ICC to provide justice for survivors and victims.
If I may add, I just earlier when I was talking, I did not give. I say that some of them do not receive the media attention, but the point is that even where media attention has been there, for instance, the massacre in Dasht al-Aili, for example, the massacre in Qalai Jangi in Shabarghan, for example, the several other ethnic cleansing projects that were carried with the full quote-unquote blessings of the U.S. forces, and these the terminology became a common knowledge among Afghans as tasfiyeh qawmi. The victims of all of these happen to be Pashtuns, and I'm not here to defend the Pashtuns, but to present the argument that I said earlier, that we do not measure it by the victim. We do not measure crimes, and we do not define crimes by who the victims are, rather by who is or isn't the culprit in this. So I just wanted to add that there have been incidences that have been reported, but of course, as usual, completely ignored.
Thank you so much. Let's have a short note from Mr. Bennett, and then we'll move to Rafi, Mr. Rafi.
Sure. Just two very short points. One, I may have missed it, Mr. Kane, but did you mention that one of the Canadian judges in the pre-tribunal on Afghanistan has been sanctioned? That is, although it was clear most of the ICC has been sanctioned with regard to its indictment of Netanyahu, there is an Afghan relevance here in that one judge was sanctioned for being involved in investigating Afghanistan in the pre-trial, the examination phase. My other point was just to kind of agree with Tom Syringe around the populism issue. And I think you used Germany as an example, but it could apply to other big European countries and as well, in that there is a coalition which is to the right of center, but which is trying to keep the far right out of power in Germany. And the challenge when we ask them to take a principled approach on issues like immigration and deportation is they say that if they don't take a hard line because of the populism and because of the way in which immigrants are unfortunately perceived, it could result in getting a far-right government. And it's the same in a couple of other big European states as well. So I think just to say that this has made it more complicated to take the kind of principled diplomatic approach or political approach that I'm advocating for. I am aware of the complication. So I'm agreeing with you on that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I agree on that as well. It is complicating things indeed.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Mr. Rafi, we can listen to you now.
I think I have no further comment. The only thing that I would like to emphasize is the issue of justice in Afghanistan and actually bringing some sort of justice in Afghanistan, particularly against the perpetrators of the violence in Afghanistan. Doesn't matter which group they have been, doesn't matter which ethnic group they belong. I think all people of Afghanistan, the ones who were not involved in the conflict or have been not part of the armed groups in Afghanistan, they are victims and direct victims. It doesn't matter which ethnic group they are connected with or from which ethnic group they are and from which region of Afghanistan they are. The problem is that the majority of Afghan people, they are the victims. I think justice is required for Afghanistan. What we are actually experiencing at this moment is just because of the ignorance of justice. And culturally, the first principle in Afghanistan is justice, and religiously, the second principle of Islam is justice. So what we are doing, we are ignoring justice in Afghanistan. So that actually given a very free hand to all perpetrators to continue and do not be responsible for any. What the Taliban are doing today is because they have seen that nobody was able to provide justice for the earlier perpetrators, even for their first time that they were in power. So I think the more we ignore justice, the more we face these atrocities in the future. If we do not learn from our history, we will be for sure repeating that again. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Do we have Ms. Roshan here? بلقیس روشن شما هستین؟ خانم محترم؟ No. Then there's a question from Hidayat in the comments, if any of you want to answer that. And then I have a question from The stage is open, by the way, for all the participants, for the audiences, if you have any questions. And then I would like to ask Mr. Zaman. بانو بلقیس روشن، شما میخواین چیز بگوین؟ مایکتون باز است. بفرمایید، اول از شما میشنم.
که سوال داشته باشه اول سوال کنه یا نه باز بشیم.
Okay, perfect. از اول من سوال خود میپرسم. From Mr. Sanizai, what do you think about the genocides, either if it's Hazara genocide or Tajik or Uzbeks, and forced displacements, erasure of other ethnic groups and their languages, about the abortion, about divorce in Afghanistan, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and the freedom to live? I know the Taliban are killed. It's not that important. They're killing each and everyone in Afghanistan because they're non-Pashtuns, because they're Hazaras, because they're Tajiks, and because they're women. 51% of the society today is in Afghanistan is women, and we are erased systematically. Do you have any comment on that? And especially according to Islam, do you have any verse I can show to the Taliban, or I don't know where, to show the Taliban that thing you're doing is not according to Islam? Because when there was a discussion in Islamabad, they said it's Islamic, and I guess they're right. Thank you.
I think I think Mr. Qani referred to the definition of genocide is when you target a particular group just because of who they are. Aside from other issues that might be, I hate to say the word relevant, that might be relevant at least to the equation. So if a particular group is targeted, and yes, that's exactly what I was presenting, is that in the last two superpower invasions of the country, the targets were primarily Pashtuns. And that's why there was a time when Pashtuns constituted, or at least it was claimed, that they constitute 70% of the population. Now people are talking about, oh no, Pashtuns are only 38% of the population. When, regardless of the validity of the claim, both are probably equally invalid or equally valid. So if their percentage drops from 70% to 38%, how did that happen? It's because they were targeted, and the idea was that for imperialist powers, it's from the start of colonialism, that was their formula, is to identify or re-identify the people of a nation into smaller groups, into blacks and whites and Muslims, non-Muslims, Tajiks and Pashtuns, whatever can divide them, and then arm them, equip them, and mobilize them against one another. And primarily this is done against a majority. That's because that starts the civil war in a sense. So therefore, all the things that you refer to, there were a lot of questions, a lot of issues in your question, but that's one thing. The other thing is, there is nothing Islamic about a lot of the things that countries, states in Muslim societies throughout the Muslim world do today. Number one, Islam does not allow for state and for the concept we usually refer to, the deen wa dawlat. The Western concept is the church and state combination. It's strictly against the etiquettes of the Quran. It's very clearly stated. There's no question about it. So by that definition, any country that claims to be Islamic is un-Islamic because the Quran doesn't allow that. Quran does not allow did not allow the Prophet. It's directly stated to him. For those who do research, go to Surah Ghashiyah, ayah number 21 and 22, clearly stated, O Prophet, we have sent you to preach to them, to teach to them. You have no authority over them. Lasta bimusaytir, you have no authority over them. So therefore, whether it's an Islamic Republic or Islamic Emirat or whatever, it doesn't matter. It is not Quranic. And now, how people justify it, of course, that's a different thing. Religion has been manipulated by almost every quote unquote believing community for their political needs. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you so much. Of course, the question was quite important for me as a woman, because in Afghanistan now we cannot take abortion, we cannot take our divorce and stuff like that.
Let me throw in something there. Don't talk like
my question. Let me ask my question first, because you said about the 70% of Pashtuns, which is now 30%, from where you got those statistics, and then it was about the Islamic countries. I agree with you. We have Islamic countries which are modern today, not like Afghanistan and maybe Pakistan, because they chose themselves. It's not my religion who gave the opportunity or the chance to them. Just like don't make friends the kafir, it's in our own Quran. And about the woman, I could not find any verse to find education rights for women or movement rights for women. If you can just answer me short that. Thank you.
That's why I was saying that. Don't argue saying that because I am a woman. It's more important to say that I'm a human being. My dignity as a human being entitles me to everything, including education. And that's why when I mentioned, I quoted earlier, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we have dignified the human race. And so that is regardless of gender. We are all entitled. Now, when people try to divide us one way or another, all those divisions are wrong. And that's why I'm not for the rights of women's rights. I'm for human rights. Because when you say women's rights, separate than human rights, then at least logically it implies that, women are an exception. I do not want to treat women as an exception, that the rights are for men. But of course, we will pay some lip service to the woman. I don't buy that. Adhere to the human rights and do not add any gender or any other suffix to it. That by itself is enough. We are all humans, and we all are dignified by our Creator. This in itself is, I think, a great.
I have been listening to this speech from a lot of other patriarchs because I'm a feminist. I'm a radical feminist, and I exactly know where we should not talk women rights, because we're all people, we are all human beings, and then we ignore women's rights in this society, in this patriarchal world. That's why I have to fight for women, because now in Afghanistan, every man is allowed to go to work, they're allowed to get education, but not women. Exactly, women are human. We need our rights. Every 10 minutes, one woman is killed, and that's because they're women. This is feminism. Thank you so much. Is Mr. Bennett?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, Mina, I'll just jump in on this. It's clear that women have a right to equality with men, and that it is, I agree with you, the world is patriarchal. Afghanistan is extremely patriarchal, and it is important to promote women's rights. Having said that, gender persecution, which I think Mr. Kane will agree is it's a crime against humanity in the Rome Statute, can apply to any gender, not only to women. And the policy on gender persecution of the prosecutor is that men, for example, who stand up for women's rights and are then persecuted for doing that are also subject to gender persecution. So it is neutral. It's on the ground of gender, but by and large, it will be, unfortunately, women. The other thing I'd just like to respond to Dr. Stanigzai, who talked about that. I think what he was doing, if I interpret him correctly, was saying that crimes ought to be defined by the victims. And perhaps we can then look at the issue of gender apartheid, because the campaign for gender apartheid to be codified, to be made illegal, it's not currently illegal, is coming from the victims, from the women, with their with support from other genders as well, including men. So if it becomes codified as part of as an international crime, part of a Crimes Against Humanity convention currently being debated, that might be an example of where the victims have lobbied for, advocated for, and achieved, if they're successful, and I'm in support of that, achieved that goal. Rather than, so it's more bottom up rather than top down, if it works.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bennett. And Belkis Roshan, are you with us?
Can I just add one sentence before going to Belkis?
Of course you can.
And that is about men and women. I think we should agree that women's rights is human rights. We should not really divide that. When we say women's rights, of course, there are some specific aspect we have to look into that. It's coming from the history and the situation of specific societies and circumstances. But by saying women's rights, we should not conclude that we are separating women's rights from human rights. Women's rights is human rights.
Thank you so much. As I said, we have to be oops or extra remark when we talk about women's rights, because it's us who are being eliminated from society. Norway is one of the best countries to live in for all humans, especially for women. We are still struggling. We are still struggling for our equal rights because we are women. It's like this in the world. Belkis Roshan, بفرمایید. The stage is yours. بانو بلقیس روشن شما هستین همراه ما؟ And then
بله. خب دوستان صحبت کردم، صحبت‌های بسیار جالب، بعضی‌هاشون آموزنده اما بعضیشان واقعا تکان دهنده است. مردم افغانستان و هر کدام ما فکر نمی‌کنم که نهادها را زیادتر ما بر شناساییش برنامه را گرفته باشیم. در این شک نیست که همین نامشان که از برای همین خاطر است. ما باید زیادتر به نظر من دلایلی که چرا نهادهای حقوق بشری نمیتونه دفاع کنه یا نمیخواد دفاع کنه، سر از او باید زیادتر صحبت کنیم. چرا نمیخواد؟ یا مردم کشورهایی که زیر شکنجه و ستم و جنایت است، اونا نمیخواد که از حقوقشان دفاع شود یا دفاع نمیکنن؟ این نهادها فقط پیسه خود میگیره و متاسفانه عواملی که باعث بخشیدن یا سفید نمایی از این نهادها میشه و حکومت ها میشه، اصل مشکل مردم زیادتر ما فکر میکنم سرزی بود و آموزنده تر شاید باشه که سرزی صحبت شود. بعد بر من جالب است که خود آقای بنت که مسئولیت حقوق بشر در افغانستان داره، اونا به عنوان نماینده ملل متحد، نماینده یک نهاد از ملل متحد، حق ورود به افغانستان نداره. و ملل متحد کورکورانه میبینه و باز در دوحه میره جلسات مشخص امرای طالب میگیره که هیچ زن نباشه. پس این خودش سازش است، خودشان میخواه که همین چیز گسترش بده. خود ملل متحد میخواه با فرمایش کشورهایی که از لحاظ اقتصادی تمویلش میکنه. مشکل اصلی عدم اجرای قوانینی که در روی کاغذ بسیار زیبا و مقبول است در طاق بلند مانده است، این درد مردم افغانستان و مردم دیگر حل نمیکنه. و حقوق بشر و حقوق زن در شک نیست که یکی به می خاطر ما نمیخوایم که خودم حداقل به عنوان یک زن این را زیادتر یک آپارتاید جنسیتی دیگه بیارم که بگویم زن تنها این مرد تنها. من به این باور هستم که زن بدون مرد نمیتونه کار کنه، مرد بدون زن نمیتونه کار کنه. یعنی هر دو تاش میتونه و هر دو تاش، هم زنای لابیگره هم مردای لابیگره، باید اما تو باجرات افشا کنه بدون سازش، بدون سفید نمایی، بدون ماسمالی. مشکل اصلی همین ماسمالی کردن است. بیشتر آقای عزیز رفیعی بسیار گپ جالب گفت. در 2008 سفیر انگلستان گفت که افغانستان یک دیکتاتور سرسخت کار داره با اکثریت چوب شده که شما مثلا خودشان هم جمله از بوده. ما بارها مصاحبه داشتیم. بله ما هم از 2001 2003 که باید یک نماینده سه بار رفتیم نماینده انتخابی افغانستان، صدای ما همی بوده. در اون وقت هم میگه بلقیس صلح نمیخواد، بلقیس نمیخواد آرام شود، طالب که بیا اصلاح شود، طالب که بیا خوب. ما نمیتونم فوزی کوفی شوم بگیم که طالب 180 درجه تغییر کرده. نه، طالب اون وقت هم تغییر نکرد، امروز هم تغییر نمیکنه، فردا هم تغییر نمیکنه. و اینایی که میگه دروغ است. ما هیچ وقت نمیتونم که تایید کنم که خانم شهبانو وطنیار یک دکتر مزخرفی، یک دکتر خائن به یک زن که ضد زن او تبلیغ میکنه که من 3 بجه شب در کابل رفتم آیس کریم خوردم، 4 بجه شب خانه خودم مدم، خیر خیریت بود. آخر روز بی وجدان انسان، بی وجدان زن، تو چطور در 3 بجه شب در کابل آیس کریم خوردن نیست؟ یعنی دروغ بگویید، دروغ شاخدار نیست. بر طالب به این سرحد باج بده. ما باید این کسا را افشا کنیم تا دنیا هم کسای نهادهایی که میخواه ما رو بتانه کمک کنه. در سطح دنیا کمیسیون ICC درست است که به محاکمه یک فرمان داد. اول خود امریکا به حیث حامی امی تروریستا، به حیث حامی امی جنایتکارا، خود کریم خان سارنوال بود رو تحریم کرد که در امریکا دیگه نمیتونی بیایی و نتانیاهو رو نتانست بگیره، نمیگیرم، پوتین رو نمیگیرم، هیبت الله رو نمیتونه، در حالی که بسیار راحت میتونه وقت ظواهری رو تانست بزنه، هیبت الله رو میتونه دستگیر کنه، حقانی رو میتونه از سر محکمه افغانستان دستگیر کنه. یعنی از یک طرف اینا زیادتر خودشان نمیخوای، گفتم پیشتر که منافیشان نیست. مشکل اصلی زنان افغانستان از فقر امروز دختر فروشی، گرچه آقای نستانگزی پیشتر از لحاظ اسلامی تشریح داد که از لحاظ اسلامی هم در طول تاریخ از زنان افغانستان سوء استفاده های غلط شده، بر منافع حاکمیت ها استفاده شدن. امی فعلا حداقل به زن فروشی را شما با پیشتر ارقام و اعداد یک خوب بخشای دیگه گفتن، یکی دیگه ما باور ندارم. او یک انسان باشه، اگر نیم باشه، اگر میلیون ها انسان باشه، جنایت است. و این خاطر ما به ارقامای ملل متحد و دیگه که میگه اینا نمیخوایم که اینجا دوباره تکرار کنم. امروز از فقر زنای افغانستان، دخترای افغانستان، شما میبینید طفلای افغانستان در سر سرک میفروشن. اما کدام نهادهای اسلامی که در خارج از دنیاست، در داخل افغانستان است، کدامش گفته؟ طالب که خود نماینده اسلام داره به اصطلاح، کجا گفته دختر فروشی در اسلام نیست، در انسانیت نیست؟ امروز به یک تجارت بسیار کلان تبدیل شده. از یک طرف غیرت مردای افغانستان امروزی شده که 4 تا زن باید بگیرن، تبلیغ میکنه، ایره مروج میسازه به خاطر که زنا را در زندانا بندازه، زنای خانگی نگه داره و ماشینای یا فابریکی چوچکشی کنه بر سربازگیری جنگ. و طفلا را از یک طرف فامیلا از فقر مجبور هستند. شهزاد اکبر سیما سمر رئیس کمیسیون حقوق به اصطلاح بشر افغانستان بود، در طول 20 سال میلیون ها دلار به نام همین توده های قربانی شده مصرف کرد، دزدی کردن، گرفتن، قطیابی شد به اصطلاح. کجا بر عدالت خواهی امو اسناد خود جرأت کردن منتشر کنه؟ دقیقا ملل متحد و امو حکومت دست نشانده دقیقا خب مستقیم نمیتونست که بگه ما نمیخوایم اینا رو نشر کنن. نهادهای حقوق بشری کجا بودن؟ تمامش پنهان کرد به خاطر که جنایتکارا در حاکمیت بمانند. و امروز وضعیت ما زایدی دیروز است، از هوا نامده طالب امروز همین چیزها رو سرش میخواه کشورها. و این متاسفانه که اکثریت به خاطر گرفتن پروژه یا به خاطر خوش ساختن قدرتمنده و حاکمان کشورها میخواه که به یک نحوه بگه هم حقوق بشر نقض میشه، هم خوب است، شما هم خوب مردم هستین. نه، تو نمیشه که هم تو خوبی بخوای، هم قدرت بخوای، هم بخوای که مدافع حقوق بشر در افغانستان، از حقوق زن در افغانستان. امروز ما میبینیم که زنان شما دیدین که امر بالمعروف چند روز پیش اعلان کرد که هر مرد که از زن خود شکایت داره در خانه میتونه که بر ما معرفیش کنه و ما میبریم اصلاح میکنیم. اصلاح به معنی چیست؟ ما میبریم زدن میکنیم، ما میبریم هر نوع چیزی که دل ما بخواه ما این کارا را سرشان میکنیم. یا اگر بشر است، وقتی که لکنوار اینی کسی که امریکا دستگیر کرد 2 نفر زد ما چی نمیکنیم که خوب است که 2 نفر کشتن اونام انسان بده، حق کشتن انسان هیچ انسان نداره بیگناه. اما وقتی که CIA کار میکرد، در گروه 02شان قطعه 02 کار میکرد، برشان آدم میکشت، اینقدر انسان در افغانستان کشت، کدام شد؟ او وقت بد نبود، حالا برشان بد شد. بر یک نفر که باز به منافع خودشان، تمام افغانایی که در آمریکاست به اصطلاح مهاجرینی که از بدبختی آمدن، میگه که اینا باید گم شود و اینا مردم نیست که به درد ما بخورن. مشکل ما اینی چیزاست که متحدانه کار نمیکنیم و اینا رو افشا نمیکنیم و نمیگیم برای خود اینا و برای دیگران.
دقیقاً.
اگر به این شکل باشیم، مطمئن باشیم که سالیان دراز دیگه به می حالت است. زنایی که بی سواد در خانه شدن، دخترایی که محروم از درس شدن، دخترایی که حق بیرون شدن از خانه خود نداره بدون محرم و محرم نداره از یک طرف، پس اینا چطور ما میتونیم که همیشه به یک چی بکنیم که اینی تو شب خوب میشه اونو تو شب خوب میشه؟ نه، اگر با این جان و نفس گفتن باشه، به نظر من نه قبلا شده بود نه حاله. حداقل جنایتی که در وقت بخشای خود جامعه مدنی، کسایی که در نهادهای دیگه کار میکردن، جنایت که خود امریکا بارها افشا شد، کجا از حق مردم در اون وقت کجا دفاع شد؟ اون وقت هم به خاطر که پروژه گرفته میشد، اگه یک نفر چند نفر یک اقلیت کمتر شاید میگفت، یک اکثریت مردم خاموش، اما یک عده ماسمالا این امور به نحو پنهان میکرد، چی از طریق رسانه ها، چی از طریق نهادها و جامعه مدنی و وکلایی که بود. مورد نمیگم که اکثریت قوی مقننه افغانستان کاش خوب می بود، اگر خوب می بود حداقل امروز یک تاریخچه سفید بر مردم خود میمان و میتونست با جرأت بگه که بد بوده. و قوی قضایی افغانستان به مشکل، قوی اجرایش خب بدون از یک مشت جنایتکار بدتر از کلش بود و اولم فرار کرد و امروز هم گلدسته های امی کشورهای هستن که برشان خدمت کرده، برشان مفت اینا کار نمیکردن، فقط جایشان تبدیل کرد سر مردم افغانستان و بدبختی‌هایی که سر زنای افغانستان میاد. امروز هر کدام ما شما حتما در مناطق خود در کل افغانستان از طریق رسانه‌های نیمبند بازم خبر میشیم، ولیکن در تماسایی که داره کلا که چی جنایات سر مردم یک زندان خود عمومی طالب ساخته بر مردم افغانستان، مخصوصا بر زنان و دخترای افغانستان، و یک زندان خانگی دوباره سر زنای افغانستان ساختن. شما میفهمین که طالب مطلقاً بر مردای داخل خانه اجازه داده که هر نوع فشار و لط و کوب و زدن و فروش و انواع آنچه میخواین شما میتونید سر زنای افغانستان انجام بدید. و متاسفانه که این حالت باز بسیار راحت میتونیم یا به نام اسلام اونا رو تیر میکنیم یا به نام دیگه تیر میکنیم، یا زنای گفتیم مثل محبوب سراج است. من تنها مردان نمیگم که سازشکار، زنان که است باید بگویم و این وظیفه وجدانی هر انسان است. عمومی گپ زدن حل نمیکنه. ما افراد که میشناسیم باید هم تو جانانه نامش بگیریم، بگیم تو نکردی، تو خیانت کردی، تو امرای زمین مردم سازش کردی. در اون وقت است که ما میتونیم در سطح افغانستان و در سطح دنیا صدای ما شنیده شود و کشورها یک ترس و هراس داشته باشه که آی مردم متحد است. اگر یکی یک نفر واقعیت بگوی با دو تا دیگه بره پشت سرش بگه یا همون تو بگه که نه به این رقم نمیشه، ما باید زاری کنیم، ناله کنیم. هیچ ملت زاری و ناله آزادی نگرفته.
ممنونم. مثل همیشه هم شما موافق هستم، چون تنها 9 دقیقه دیگه مونده و 2 سپیکر دیگه هم داریم. آخرین سوال از آقای ایوب میگیریم و بعد دوستان جواب داشتن میشنویم و بعد میریم به بقیه پروگرام. آقای ایوب بفرمایید.
تشکر بسیار زیاد بانو مینا و بقیه دوستان که هستن. من میخوام یک سوال از آقای زمانستانی سعی بکنم. اقلا ببخشید 2 سوال. شما در گفتارتان گفتین که پشتونها 70% نفوس افغانستان تشکیل میدهند یا میدادند که حالا کمتر شده. شما همین آمار به اساس چی میگن؟ تا جایی که من خبر دارم در افغانستان هیچ وقت یک نفوس شماری درست نشده در افغانستان. همین آمار شما از کجا گرفتین؟ دوم ای که شما میگن که دو اول قدرت آمد اکثرا پشتونها را کشت. آیا این حق برای طالبان میده که نسل کشی کنه در افغانستان و این جنایت هایی که طالبان هر روز و هر شب میکنه آیا اینا حق زیر دارن؟ به خاطر که یک 2 سوپر پاور آمد عمدتا پشتونها را کشت، در حال که 2 سوپر پاور در تمام افغانستان مردم را کشت، نه تنها پشتونها را. اگر کشته شد در تمام افغانستان کشته شدن. و امروز میبینید که طالبان نیم جامعه را در یک زندان، در یک سیاهچاه انداختن. مکاتب بسته است، پوانتون ها بسته است، کار بسته است و تماما خرابی هایی که در روی زمین پیدا میشه در افغانستان امروز ما میبینیم و او به خاطر عملکرد اینمی طالب است. چطور ما میتونیم باز هم بگیم که حالا طالبان در افغانستان کشتنش توسط عساکر امریکایی یا توسط عساکر کوالیشنشان درست است، این هم باید تعقیب شود، اما وقتی که اگر ما مقدار جنایت رو میبینیم، جنایت طالبان با دیگه جنایت اصلا قابل چی نیست، مقایسه نیست. تشکر.
خب در مورد احصایه ما 7 احصایه داریم. در فکر میکنم در 70-80 سال گذشته. ای که کدامش دقیق است یا نیست، معتبر است یا نیست، همه ایشان ما قبلا گفتم که صرف نظر از معتبر دانستن احصایه ها، این ارقامی است که داده شده برای ما و تایید شده. ما در یک مقاله دارم در آکسفورد یونیورسیتی، چیز میدل ایست اینستیتوت، در اونجا همو هر هفتش نشر است. او یک مسئله دومی که ما بحث کردیم، منظور ما از ذکری که ما جرم باید به اساسی که کی قربانی جرم واقع شده، اگر ایره معیار قرار بدیم که باید چنین باشه، بنان قسمت اکثر قتل که در افغانستان صورت گرفت در وقت روس‌ها، پشتونها را میکشتن منتها به نام اشرار. امریکایی که آمدن بازم پشتونها را میکشتن منتها به نام طالب. او لزوما به این معنا نیست که امو کسی که به نام طالب کشته شد به طالب ارتباط داشت یا نه، منتها منظور من ای بود که قوای کشورهای استعمارگر جرمهای خود را به یک نحو پنهان میکنن. مثلا ما امروز در غزه اسرائیلی ها چرا ممکن 500,000 انسان ها را اونجا کشته باشه، منتها از حدود 70-80 هزار ما احصایه داریم، ولی میگن چرا؟ میگه حماس است. بنان حماس بهانه است، کشتن فلسطینی ها عمل است. اشرار بهانه بود، کشتن پشتون ها وسیله بود. به نام طالب کشتن بهانه بود. منظور اینجاست که ما به اساسی که کی قربانی جرم واقع شده، ما به این چیز فکر نمیکنم مورد بحث مایی بود که کی و چی به کس حق میده که سر کس دیگه باز حکومت کنه یا نکنه. اساس انسانیت مایی است که قرآن هم به او حکم میکنه که اگر یک انسان کشته میشه بیگناه، اگر یک انسان کشته میشه معادل است که تمام بشریت کشته شده. هیچ کس حق را که خدا به انسان داده که حیات است، او حق را که خدا داده بنده او را بگیره، به هر نام، به هر بهانه، چی نژاد باشه، زبان باشه، هویت دین باشه، هر چیزی که باشه. و در قسمت هویت دین بزرگترین دفاع را آیه 137 سوره نساء است که خداوند فرموده که اگر یک کس، اینجا حق ارتداد است که ما در هیچ یکی از کتب آسمانی و غیر آسمانی تا به حال ندیدیم که در قسمت حق ارتداد خداوند میفرماید که اگر یک کس یک بار ایمان آورد، بعد از او از ایمان برگشت، باز ایمان آورد و باز برگشت، یعنی همین خود تکرار در تکرار که میگه در آیه 137 سوره نساء خودش نشان میده که ما حتی میتونیم که خداوند را نپذیریم و خداوند میگه که شما به اونها غرض ندارید. منتها برای ما چی شده؟ یک روز آمدن گفتن اگر کمونیست نیستین میکشیم. دیگرش آمدن به نام مجاهدین گفتن که اگر ریش نماندین میکشیمتان، اگر ریش ضرورت ریش برای مجاهدین فرض کنیم 1-2-3 اینچ بود، طالبان آمدن گفت نه باید 5-6 اینچ ریش دراز با. مثلا یعنی هر کدام به نام هر ایدئولوژی، به نام هر مذهب، هر کدامش آمدن و حالا هم شرایطی که در افغانستان است، فعلا از مردم افغانستان اگر پرسان کنند ممکن نسبتا راضی باشن، ولی محرومیت هایی که در اونجا شده او از او خودشون پوشش شده نمیتونه. به شمول مسائلی که خواهر ما مینا رفیق گفتن و به اونها یک یادآوری کنم که شما تنها فمینیست نیستن، در این جلسه من هم هستم. تشکر به همه اکتفا.
روان از شما، من یک رادیکال فمینیست هستم. بعد میگم در جنبندی آخر خود نمیفهم آقای تغرا یک رپلیک دارن اما میتونن در کامنت نوشته کنن، چون که چند ثانیه دیگه یا چند دقیقه کوتاه داریم.
بسیار کوتاه بسیار باشن مینی جان عزیز، بسیار کوتاه. اگر ما در گپ شما را میشنویم آقای زمان، پس بزرگترین، واقعا بزرگترین قربانیان و بزرگترین کسایی که سرش جرم شده در افغانستان زنها است. باید ما از اونا پرسان کنیم که سر زنها چقدر ظلم شده در طول تاریخ افغانستان و خصوصا در 50 سال آخر چقدر زنها زیر ظلم قرار گرفته و خصوصا در این 4 سال سیاه و تاریک آخر و هم در دوره اول طالبان. این ما باید از یاد نبریم. باید اگر هم این کارو بکنیم، اول ما باید از زنها باید پرسان کنیم که چقدر سر ظلم شده و اونا همین ظلم و کرایم باید تعریف بکنن. تشکر.
من قبول دارم نظر شما را. اگر منظور محرومیت باشه، اگر منظور محرومیت ها باشه از زنها حالانه از قرنها در تمام دنیا، باز به خصوص در افغانستان، او را
در جایی که ما در یک دنیای پاتریارکی زندگی میکنیم، یکی به نام کمونیست گفته شما میکشن و آل به نام دین و به نام زن کشته میشن.
من منظور من دیگه چیز بود. اگر اجازه تان من منظور دیگه چیز بود. شما باید اول زنده باشین که از حقوقتان دفاع کنین. منظوری من بود که در این تهاجمات نیم قرن گذشته حیات مردم از حیات محروم شدن. اول باید زنده باشن. البته بعد از او ای که
رادیکال فمینیست‌ها بسیار زیاد میفهمن که اول چی کنن دوم چی کنن. تشکر یک جهان از شما.